The Instructor podcast with Terry Cook, talking with leaders, innovators, experts and game changers about what drives them.
Welcome to the Instructor podcast. This is a show where I speak to leaders, experts, innovators and game changers to look at ways that we can help you improve your driving school and potentially become an even more awesome driving instructor. As always, I am your somewhat epic host, Terry Cook, and I'm delighted to be here, but even more delighted that you have chosen to listen. And today, we've got a tremendous episode lined up for you. I was sought out by Phil Cowley, who told me that he was planning a standards check, even though he didn't need one. He'd requested one, and he asked if he'd come on the show and talk about why he requested one, his experience on the standard check, his takeaways from it. Would he do it again? Did he get what he wanted from it? Was it beneficial? All this kind of stuff. And that's what we got into the episode. I think it's a brilliant episode for anyone that is looking to develop, or anyone that potentially even has a standards check coming up, or anyone that's maybe not even hitting the triggers, but is considering it. Definitely worth a listen. And big thanks to Phil for joining me. Just before we dive into the show, I want to take a moment to remind you that wherever you're listening, make sure you click subscribe. That way, whenever we release a new episode like this one, which dropping on the same day as episode 1, it will drop into your feed automatically. You don't have to go looking for it, and it does help boost my numbers a little bit as well. So make sure you do that now, unless you're driving, in which case, pull up safely. Now click subscribe. And if you're feeling extra generous, then go and leave me a nice little 5-star review. Or, if you don't like the show, leave me a 1-star review. But any review is welcome. I always appreciate that feedback. You can leave reviews on places like Apple and Spotify, or you can even go over to my Facebook page on The Instructor and leave a review there. But I will catch you at the end of the show with a bit more news around the premium content. But for now, let's get stuck into the show. And on this episode of the Instructor podcast, I am joined by the ever delightful Phil Cowley. How are we doing, Phil?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
No, it's been a pleasure. We've had you on the previous podcast, or ADI Story was on you before. ADI Stories you were on before, and we'll probably come on to that in a minute, actually. But yeah, it's great to have you on the main feed of the Instructor podcast. But before we dive into that, do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about what you do?
So I've been an ADI for 16 years. I run a driving school with 7 driving instructors and hopefully growing. I'm an instructor trainer as well. And yeah, that's basically it, really.
Cool. You were also the first ever guest on ADI Stories, as I mentioned before. And yeah, I think I had 2 guests on. I had to take a break because of nuts going on in the personal life. But if people want to find out more about you, I'd suggest going back and checking out ADI Stories. And I'll put a link into the show notes, actually. But the question I like to ask everyone when we start the show is, well, the tagline for this show is I speak to leaders, experts, innovators, and game changers. So which of those, or more of those, do you think you are?
So I always love it when you actually have a guest this question, because I love how much they squirm and get awkward. So I'm going to do the same. I suppose running a driving school, I would class myself as a leader, and I feel like I lead my team in that sense. I don't tend to be the sort of leader that I'm like telling them what to do. I feel like I sort of try and lead by example. So I'm like, this is how I do it, and this is my values, and I sort of, in that sense, hope, and it seems to sort of work that way, that they follow, and our school has this sort of kind of ethos, and we have a great group of driving instructors that I recommend to any of my pupils. So I think that helps from that sort of kind of perspective. Yeah, it's not sort of a dictatorship. I'm not sure I would call myself an innovator in general, because I do tend to get most of my ideas from other people and I just make them my own. And however, I am sort of recently just started out employing driving instructors rather than taking them on as franchisees. So I think that's relatively new in the business. There are a couple of other schools out there that do that, but so from that perspective, I would say I'm sort of putting myself out there and seeing how it goes.
Excellent. No, I did not know that, so I am making a note frantically to get you on another show to speak about that, because we've got something else coming up around driving schools and so on. So yeah, you may be on another show. Speaking of which, it's been mightily impressive seeing how much more you're putting yourself out there recently. Like I say, you were the first guest in ADI Stories. You started doing more on Facebook videos and on TikTok videos. You were on another podcast recently, a local one you told me about. And then, all this, it's just brilliant to see you doing it. But coming back to today's episode, the big thing, or the big reason we got you on here is because a little while ago you messaged me and you said that you were sort of thinking about requesting a standards check because you've not had one for a good few years. And you were asking me, do you think it'll make a good episode for the podcast? And my initial thought was, that sounds like a really good premium episode, because on the premium content, I tend to get a lot more specific, whereas on the sort of the regular shows, it can be a bit more broad and a bit more general. But then the more I thought about it, the more I thought, no, actually, I think this would be a great one to put out in public, because it really helps promote yourself as well. But the big question I want to ask, and I think a lot of ADIs would want to ask, is why? Why, if you've not been called in for a standard check for 5 or 6 years and your test results show you're not going to get called in for a standards check for a little while, why would you request a standards check?
Yeah, that was the first question that everyone asked before when they found out. Interestingly, I had kept it secret as well. So I hadn't actually, I think you, my wife, and one of my mates who only the night before knew about it, to be honest. So it was quite a small circle of people that knew, which actually was probably me protecting myself in case it went horribly wrong. But the why, so there was 2 reasons really, I would say 2 main reasons, and it depends on which hat I was wearing at the time. So for my instructor sort of kind of hat, as an instructor myself, I wanted it from just a development point of view. I'd done 5-6 years of extra training since my last standards check, and I wanted to sort of go, have I actually improved? Obviously I felt like I had, but could I go and show that on the day, basically? So I think it was kind of proving a point to myself a little bit. So that was one side of it, and I'm always like looking for ways to challenge myself in that sort of sense. And then the other side, and this is probably the main reason I did it, was my instructor trainer hat. And I realized that I was talking to ADIs and PDIs about their standards check and part 3s, but I couldn't remember what it felt like. I had like vague ideas of nerves and stuff like that, but I didn't really remember the process. And also the process was slightly different as well, because it was an hour test, an hour-long test, and now it's obviously gone down to 45 minutes. So I kind of wanted to go through that 45-minute test, and this sort of idea that you're not, although you are allowed to stop on the standard check. And actually my examiner told me that before I got in the car as well, so he sort of reassured me with that. But I just wanted to go through that process and those emotions that you get on the lead up to it, and the process of like the engagement call, and because again that wasn't around when I did my last standards check. So yeah, I wanted to go through the process so that when I'm having that conversation with ADIs and PDIs, I can really sort of help them from a better standpoint, basically.
So there's a few points there I want to touch back on, but I think it's important we address the elephant in the room, because like you mentioned there, you've not told a lot of people for fear, just in case it goes horribly wrong. Did it go horribly wrong, Phil?
Not horribly wrong. I feel like it could. I got an A, so I'm happy with that. I don't think it was the best lesson I've ever done. I think the pressure that gets to you, and the stuff I would look at and do differently. But yes, I was happy I got an A. So it didn't go horribly wrong. And my wife thought that she didn't realize that you get 3 attempts. So she was a little bit, I didn't realize this until after the test, that she was worried that if I failed, I lost my job. She was just like, why would you put yourself under that pressure? But yeah, so it was, it didn't go horribly wrong, and I got an A, so I'm happy.
I mean, we might touch back onto sort of the mechanics of the actual lesson, the standards check itself in later on. But I do just want to throw out there, you put up an awesome video on your Facebook page. And again, I'll link to this in the show notes. But anyone listening that wants to look at the sort of how the lesson itself went, and I found it really interesting around how you adapted it and that side of it. Definitely go and watch Phil's video that he put up on Facebook, about 20 minutes long, and it'll be a brilliant sort of companion piece of this podcast, I think, and vice versa. But I want to touch a little bit more around the process itself. So like the standards check. I think a big question I would like to ask you as someone that's just had it recently, that requested it, that has got the high sort of test marks anyway, and someone that trains, as you said, PDIs and instructors and that side of it. Do you think initially that the test was a fair reflection of your ability?
No. Was it? Oh, that's a good question. No, I feel like I could do a better lesson, because I think I got in my head. But then I'm thinking back to it, and I'm thinking there was stuff in there that I know I tell my PDIs to do that maybe I don't do as well in the car as an instructor. And I've always said this, that I feel like I am actually a better trainer than I am an instructor. So I know the test inside out, back to front, and I know I can watch someone's lesson and instantly sort of know where the advice needs to go and help them sort of kind of progress that way. And I've always found it difficult because I got trained in the old ways, the PSTs and all that sort of stuff, and like there was no coaching involved. It was like do it this way, and we were doing all the analysis. And even though I know that I need to do that differently, and I do, but there are times where I feel myself falling back into those sort of ways that I did it for like 10 years like that. So it's quite hard to sort of kind of, that it slips back in. So yeah, there's an element of, I feel like I could do a little bit better, but I also know that I'm not perfect and need to carry on improving that.
I mean, I'm going to try really hard not to word this question so it's a loaded question. So forgive me if it sounds that way. But like you said, it's not a fair reflection of what you do, but you've come away in potentially, in your opinion, and I hope I'm not putting words in your mouth, almost underperforming a little bit, in the sense of you've had more pressure than normal. So when you're under the most pressure you're going to have as a driving instructor, that's the level you perform at. So to me, I almost look at that the other way, as if that is a fair reflection. Someone's putting you under this immense amount of pressure, as you said, potentially, 3 times your job's at stake, and yet you're still performing at that high standard. So it's a bit like, well, if you're doing that under that pressure, what are you going to do afterwards, when you're not under that pressure? And I think the other thing I'd throw at you is, potentially, just going off what you said, you may be noticing things and reflecting more on your lessons, perhaps more than you would do normally because you're forced to. So I'm not quite sure what the question is there. I suppose, is that something you would agree with? Or
Yeah, I'm sure there's a question somewhere in there.
Yeah.
So yes, I think the reflection thing is really interesting, actually, because I think that's how people should see the standards check. It is not this me versus the DVSA and the DVSA trying to take my job away, but actually as a development tool. And you get this opportunity to, from the second you get that test booked, and actually this should start happening way before you get a test booked, but definitely once the test booked, you're hyper focused on how you're delivering lessons. So instantly, even those 5 weeks, even if you don't get any extra training, you're probably improving because you're self-reflecting. And most people then obviously go and get some training in that period as well. So you're developing as an instructor. And then even if you don't pass or you don't get the score you want on the standards check, the examiners are pretty good at giving you some ideas of what you need to go away and work on. So it is all about developing. And I know there's the pressure of the fact if you keep not passing, that you may lose your job. But I suppose the flip side of that is if you do the training, you've got to that standard before, you should be able to get back to that standard anyway. So it is about developing as an instructor rather than this B versus the DVSA, I think.
So you mentioned about getting feedback from the examiner. Were you sort of happy with the feedback you've got in the sense of, do you feel like you've got something you can go away and work on?
So it was interesting because there wasn't so much. Oh, actually, no, there was probably two main bits of feedback. One was quite specific to the lesson, so it was a particular fault that happened on the lesson that I brushed over a little bit because it was a steering sort of fault, and there was bigger stuff going on with roundabouts, and I wanted to deal with that. And I also felt that the steering fault, that if I went away and went, right, let's go have a look at the steering, the second I brought the pupil's attention to steering, his steering would be fine. It was more a case of it went wrong while other stuff was going on. So it was a tricky one to deal. I felt like on the lesson in my head when I was thinking about it, I thought I can't deal with this in 45 minutes. So this is a long-term sort of fault that needs to be fixed over time. But you can't do that on a standards check, unfortunately. So there was that point, and I sort of took that on board, but that felt more standards check specific rather than as an instructor, you need to improve this. The other thing he did, and again, this is really frustrating because it's something I do get my instructors to do, was when analysing the faults, we were talking, I was getting the pupil to do the analysis, which is great, but maybe I should have gone through more like advantages and disadvantages with the pupil. And when I'm sat in the back, I'm like, I'll jump in and say, what about asking about advantages and disadvantages? But when you're in the hot seat, you forget. So maybe that's something I'll bring more into my lessons, or consciously, I suppose.
Cool. All right, I want to rewind back just a little bit to when you first decided to go and get the standards check. You've obviously had to contact the DVSA and arrange for the standards check. Any queries from them as to why you wanted to do it?
No. I emailed Paddy, which I don't know if it's PA. Yeah, I just call it Paddy because it spells Paddy. Yeah. I don't even know if that was the right people to email, but I put that in my email, and I was expecting this to take ages. And 2 days later, I got an email from them saying, "We've put you in the system," basically, and the same. At exactly the same time, an email from the people who set up standards check saying, right, go book your standards check. And I was like, whoa, steady on. No queries at all, actually. They were just like, yeah, off you go, book it, sort of thing. It suddenly felt really real at that point, and that's when the nerves started kicking in, and I was quite surprised by that because obviously I'd decided to do this, so I wasn't expecting to be nervous. But yeah, it was suddenly like, oh, actually, I've got to go and actually do a standards check. I suppose the speed of it was interesting. That, and this is something I again have taken. The whole point of this was, as a trainer, what can I pass on, and something that I would, not so much for part 3 guys because they know that they've got one coming up, but I think an ADI who is sort of happily going along, from that moment you get that email saying go book your test, it was only 5 weeks to my standards check, and I don't think that's enough time to suddenly turn around your training and get up to standard if you're not at that standard. So for me, I think it would be always train as if you've got a standards check coming up in 5 weeks time, and continuously improve, and that'll do 2 things. I think it'll do, if you do get the standards check, you're better prepared. But actually, if you continuously improve it, you're probably less likely to get a standards check in the first place anyway. So, I was surprised by the time frame of it. It was all a lot quicker than I was expecting.
I want to come back to you about the engagement call in a moment. Like you said, it came around pretty quick. You had 5 weeks. There's not an awful lot of time to plan. And I think you mentioned before, because you're training instructors and running your own school stuff, you don't have this vast array of students. But I think anyone that listens to my premium content knows that I do a show called the Standard Check Checklist, and one of the questions I always ask everyone on there is, who would you take? So I'm keen to get your thoughts on that. How did you decide which pupil to take? Because obviously, like I say, your selection was a bit more narrow.
Mm-hmm. So my first thought was rapport. Basically, I wanted a pupil who I get on well with, gives me good feedback and talks to me and asks questions. And interestingly, after watching the video of the lesson, one of my instructors said, "Can I steal that pupil for my standards check?" So he was a good pupil in that sense for talking. So rapport is, for me, is number one on that list. Then I've got, to be fair, I have quite good rapport with all my pupils. We sort of create that scenario with the way we do the lessons. I do have quite a few pupils with quite high anxiety levels, and I love teaching them, and we have great lessons, but they would not have been appropriate for a standards check, mainly because they probably would have just passed out mid-lesson. So definitely that, like, go away from your sort of like super nervous pupils, I would think, because you don't want, like, most pupils will drop in level a little bit because of the nerves, but if you've got a particularly anxious pupil, it's going to happen even more. And then my next thought was probably what level, and I think a lot of people think this, like, what level of pupil do I want? So do I want a newbie? Do I want someone like midway through, but they're learning maybe a new skill that's slightly more demanding? Or do I want someone who's test ready and we're just doing sort of like fixing stuff? And I think for that one, it's not about, there's not a better answer. It's which one do you prefer as an instructor? So if you love that sort of kind of new lesson stuff, then take a newbie. I know they say you're not supposed to take like a beginner pupil, but you can take a beginner who you're, I suppose, teaching something for the second or third time. So you can do like a moving off and stopping lesson if it's not sat at the side of the road the whole time, but you're doing moving off and stopping, and you're not pulling it, you're not sitting there at the side of the road for 20 minutes having a briefing sort of thing. So that's what they want to move, like a moving lesson. So for me, I preferred that sort of middle ground pupil. So we did roundabouts, and I didn't know this at the time what we were going to be doing, but he was that sort of pupil where he had sort of covered a lot of things, but it was now time to start fine tuning those skills. So it's that sort of level.
Cool. Let's move on to your engagement call then, because I'm intrigued to get your thoughts on this, to find out whether you found it beneficial. Did it settle you down for the standards check? Did it, if this had been your first standards check, do you think that would have helped you for your those? How did you find it overall?
Interesting, the settle down thing. Yes, I think it did. It because, well, I knew the enforcement officer anyway through doing part 3 and part 2, and part 3's, part 2's as well, actually. So, but actually just I've never had that long a conversation with him, and having that chat with him, it kind of makes the person real a little bit more, and you do see that it is a development thing, not we're trying to get you sort of kind of moment. So that, I think that it did settle me down in that sense. I think the engagement calls are a great idea, actually, because they are very much they're not really about the standards check, actually, which I think some people sort of get confused. They don't want to know who you're taking or anything like that. Partly because they're 2 weeks before the test, so in a way you shouldn't know what you're about to go and teach in 2 weeks time. So it's more about they discuss your, I can't remember what they're called, but the report form with all your faults on it. They go through that with you. Obviously, that was an interesting call, because he didn't know at the time when we started the call that I'd requested the standards check. And so he was looking at the form going, I'm not really sure why, what's happening here. And I mentioned to him that I requested it and the reasons why. So that was interesting. I almost didn't want to tell him that at one point, because I didn't want to say, oh, I'm an instructor trainer and I'm doing this for this reason, because I didn't want to set like expectations too high. But I thought we might as well be honest and have that conversation. And he was actually really sort of impressed with that idea and stuff like that. So that was good. But we did have a chat through the report form, and you could see a couple of like particular faults, like steering, which interestingly came up on the standards check. And I can't remember, observations maybe, but they're quite popular faults anyway. So there wasn't anything glaringly obvious, but a couple of things I'll go and have a look at. But again, it's all about development, and like they ask you about what training have you been doing, and I'm assuming obviously my answers were lots, but I'm assuming if you hadn't, maybe they would suggest some training. I'm not sure, but it was very much a positive call. It wasn't a trying to catch you out or anything like that. It was all about development, and quite informal as well. It wasn't it wasn't like an interview or anything like that. So yeah, it was good.
And we're just taking a slight pause in the show to give a big shout out to all my latest premium subscribers. These are the guys that subscribed in between seasons 3 and 4, and they are the wonderful people: Nicola McDonald, Nicholas Smith, Emma Cottington, Emily Elms, Lexi Jones, Michelle Smith, and Vix C. These are all truly awesome human beings who have opted to support the Instructor podcast. You too can support the Instructor podcast by signing up to my Patreon. You can either sign up just to support the show for £2 a month, which helps with the running costs, or you can subscribe to all the content, which gets you essentially all the content and all the bonuses. Best way to do it: go to the show notes. You can click on the direct link there to take you through to subscribe, or if you want to find out a bit more, www.theinstructorpodcast.com, or you can get in touch with me on social media. I'm easy to find. Drop me a message. I'll happily have a chat with you, tell you how investing £10 a month can get you all these awesome discounts and bonuses. If you would like to find out a little bit more, hang about to the end of the show and I'll tell you a bit more then. But for now, let's get stuck into the second half of this awesome interview with Phil Cowley. One of the things you mentioned there was that they weren't keen to know about the standards check. They don't want to know topics like that because, as you mentioned, you shouldn't know it a few weeks in advance. But I'm sure you're like me. You like to browse Facebook now and again, and it's one of the most common questions that I see about it is, what subject should I do on my standards check? And people planning it that far in advance. But and you did mention this on your video, but it's well worth repeating because I found it really interesting, the topic of yours. So I'll let you tell the story, but the fact that it changed just before your standards check. So just tell us about how you decide on the topic and what happened.
Yeah, so I always tell my PDIs and ADIs that do not pick do not pick it in advance because it will get you caught out. Basically, the best lesson is going to be the one that you would have done anyway with that pupil, because that's the one they need, and you're going to be, if they need it, you're going to be able to show development, and it's just going to be the better lesson basically. So before that, I hadn't picked a topic anyway. So the way we picked the topic we were going to do was based on issues that had happened the previous lesson. So it was just a natural occurrence of, okay, that'll work. Let's go and do that. There can be some variations in that, I suppose, because if it's a topic that might not work for a standards check because of the location and the times, you might have to change it. But I would still make it about, okay, we can't do that, but is there anything else that you need to be practicing, basically? So make it as organic as possible. So then we set off, and I turned up for to picking up the pupil. And interestingly, I was quite nervous at that point, but once he got in the car, it felt like a real lesson. So we set goals as we normally did, and off we went. And yeah, he made a couple of mistakes at the roundabouts on the approach. One being a bit hesitant, and the other one coming into the roundabout way too quickly, which meant he was then staring to the right for too long, and then his positioning went a bit wayward. So yeah, then I had that call to make, like, do I swap the lesson to roundabouts, or do I stick with my original plan that I'd had in my head for the last week? And yeah, I think in my head, I was like, I feel better when this feels like a real lesson and not a forced lesson. And on any real lesson, I would have swapped to roundabouts because they were two pretty big faults. And so, yeah, I had that conversation with the pupil, agreed that he agreed that, yeah, I'd like to go and have a look at it. And so, yeah, we swapped the goal and complete topic of the standards check about 10 minutes before we got there. So, yeah, that was, a big change, but actually felt really natural. And obviously roundabouts is topic teach all the time anyway. So there was no prep needed. It was just like, and there were roundabouts near the test center from where we were as well. Yeah, so it sort of felt natural. And I wonder if I had gone with the original plan, even though I could have actually avoided roundabouts on that plan. So it's not like the roundabouts would have like kicked me in the butt halfway around because there was no roundabouts on that original route. but I'm wondering if it would have affected the pupil because they would have had those roundabout faults in their head and maybe lack of confidence. So that's one of the benefits, I would say, of changing that lesson, is because so that the pupil's not going away going, oh, well, I had an okay lesson on that, but what about those roundabouts sort of kind of feeling? So yeah, it definitely made sense to swap it.
Potentially. I mean, I want to come back to your video for a second. I mentioned you before, I was going to say this because it really resonated with me that I can't remember if it was that point or when you picked the student up or whatever, but there was something before your test where you'd been really nervous and someone just clicked and you used the phrase, oh, I'm a driving instructor. I just need to teach this person how to drive. And it really resonated with me back to mine, which was about 4 or 5 years ago, actually. And I was just having the worst standards check ever. I was abysmal as an instructor for the first 10 minutes because all my focus, I was literally looking over my shoulder at the examiner rather than looking at my student. And I got her to pull up and I asked her a question and she started talking. I can remember just talking to myself and saying, you're a driving instructor. You don't need to worry about the examiner. Just teach the student, help them learn. That's all you need to do. And then as soon as I said that, I then salvaged the standards check and brought it back around. And do you think that people, and potentially even you to begin with, put too much emphasis on the examiner, put too much emphasis on the standards check rather than just going out and doing what we do day in, day out?
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's really hard not to. I don't think I was, like, I could see the examiner in my mirror and in my sort of peripheral vision. I don't think I was fully focused on the examiner, but I was aware that I was being tested. And that really did affect the way I was sort of doing lessons. Interestingly, what you said about it's just a driving lesson. I remember actually on the way there, I at one point literally shouted at myself, just like, it's just a driving lesson. Like, I'm in the car on my own, just like, it's just a driving lesson. Like trying to get it out of my head. And there was a couple of moments as well that clicked in. And the first one was when we first got in the car with the pupil, way before we headed off to the test. And I got my little goal board out that we fill out on lessons. And that felt real. It just felt like, oh yeah, it is just a driving lesson. So that calmed me down a lot, that we just went into a lesson. So that was great. And then during the test, again, actually the start of the test, I felt quite natural as well. And then he started making faults on the test, as they do, throwing you lovely curveballs. So as that, that's when I got in my head a little bit, because I was firefighting a little bit at the start of the test. And there was a bigger mistake on one of the roundabouts, but there was nowhere to pull over. So I had to do a couple of other roundabouts, that was fine. We managed to get through those. And then he made another mistake when I went into the estate to pull him over. So I fixed that. And this is when I was like, oh, what's going on? And again, I had that moment of pull over. We then had that conversation and I chilled out a little bit in that situation, because it felt like a lesson again. And I think actually from that point onwards, I completely forgot the examiner was there and just worked on the lesson. So yeah, it is those moments where you have to kind of just go, wait a minute, it's just do what you do what you normally do, sort of thing.
So you decided to take the standards check, even though you weren't due one, and you had those goals and the reasons for taking it. Do you think you achieved what you wanted to achieve by doing the standards check?
Massively, yeah, and probably more, I would say, because I have learned a lot about my own instructing, but more importantly, I think I've learned a lot about how and I think I can definitely pass this on to PDIs and ADIs, and of like doing this video and this podcast and the videos and stuff. I think hopefully that will help some. Already had a local trainer who had watched the video saying, can I pass that to my PDIs? So I'm happy to help all PDIs. It doesn't have to just be mine. So I think it's given me that experience. I think I can empathize more with the process and hopefully advise better in that sense. I think that's actually already happened as well, actually, interestingly. I've already had the benefit of, so actually the day before my standards check, I had an hour-long conversation with an ADI who's got a standards check coming up, and they were worrying about the engagement call. and I just about a week before I'd had an engagement call, so I was able to fully just really tell her what happens on an engagement call with no sort of like, oh, I'm not sure. I knew what happened on an engagement call. Even, well, actually, no, she has got a different examiner, but I know who the examiner she was, so I know how that call would go. So yeah, really was able to help there. And then also on the same day, a PDI that I'd been helping out, not one of my PDIs from the start, but had come for some extra training, had a part 3, her final part 3 on the same day that I had my standards check. And again, I was able to help her more, even though I hadn't done this process at the same time, but because I was going through the same feelings, probably not quite as extreme as hers with the final part 3 versus my status check. But I was still feeling nervous. I was still planning for a part 3, and she was doing the same. So I was able to really empathize with how she was, like, what she was feeling at the time, and she passed. So yeah.
Excellent. Wins all around. I think a lot of instructors, and I'm going to caveat this first by saying everyone's different. So this is purely maybe your opinion or my opinion or whatever, but a lot of instructors like to get someone in to watch their lesson. So they'll get another trainer in to watch a lesson and get feedback. Obviously, the big benefit with that is that you get a longer conversation with that trainer afterwards. But would you recommend potentially that every trainer does this, or everyone that doesn't need a standards check potentially still goes out and does one to gain that experience?
What goes does a standards check? Yes, because I think it's a great experience to go through. I suppose if you didn't want to be as extreme as me, you could go and do get a trainer to come and do a mock standards check, and that might give you that similar sort of feelings. But yeah, no, definitely. Even just getting people sat in the back of your car is a great experience. Like, I have people sat in the back of probably 60 to 70% of my lessons, to be honest, because PDIs and ADIs come and watch lessons. But yeah, that really does make you think about what you're doing when you're on lessons. So yeah, something along those lines is definitely a great idea. And going to watch other instructors' lessons is always a good idea as well, because you're amazed what you pick up. Like, even me, I sit in the back of PDI's lessons and I pick up stuff like this person who's been doing the job for like 1 month. They suddenly, just because everyone comes with their own life experiences and own ideas and stuff, so they come up with something. I'm like, that's brilliant, I'm going to use that. So definitely, I think we can live in our own little bubble quite often as driving instructors, so getting out there and getting in the back of other people's cars or vice versa is always a good opportunity.
Cool. All right, so I'm going to ask you for some advice now. So if you were someone that had, if I was someone that had a standards check coming up, I've just been told today, and I haven't, by the way, I've just been told today that I need to book my standards check. In that run up to a standards check, what advice would you be giving to people?
Well, my first advice would be training way before that. So yeah. Don't wait for that email. Go get some training, and they always be doing something. I would get a local trainer. Is probably my bet if you only had 5 weeks, because you're going to be lucky to find a standards check course or something that happens to just fall in that time frame. I was quite lucky that I had the expo 2 days before my standards check, so that was great. Going to listen to some of the industry's leaders, so that was quite handy. But get a local trainer, find out who's good, get them sat in the back of your lessons, and get some advice on that. Don't be maybe even a couple of trainers as well. That's always like, get some different advice. I think, and this is something I've experienced with people who want help from me, where they maybe just they want one session, because obviously they're having to pay for that session. I think you would benefit from more, like, so seeing that progression going through. So don't think of it as just like one session will fix everything. It's like, you wouldn't expect a pupil to do the same. So yeah, but invest in yourself and do a few sessions and take that opportunity.
Awesome. Now, I know you're someone that does a lot of CPD, that invests heavily in themselves and their business. So I'm intrigued to know what resources you can tell us that you use, that you like, or that you would recommend to anyone that wants to develop.
Your podcast.
That's a great place to start. We'll leave that there.
Yeah, 100% actually your podcast, because I think the beauty of your podcast is it allows you to like find certain parts that you like, and then you can go off and go, actually, I want to learn a bit more about that. So that's quite a good starting point. From within the industry, I do a lot of work with Lou Walsh. I have watched her all of the videos that she's ever made, and she's watched a few of my lessons and given me feedback on that. And she sat in the back of lessons with me actually before. So yeah, using a trainer, I suppose, from that perspective, and I've been on her courses as well. More recently, and I think this is more for me as a progressing myself even further, I've started doing the Tri Coaching BTEC in driver coaching education, I think they call it. And actually that's been really interesting as well. Completely different sort of course actually. So in very much all the other training I've ever done, it's like, this is the information, off you go. Whereas the Tri Coaching one is about self-developing really. So they give you the information, but actually you have to then go off and do it on your lessons and then write reports about how it's gone on those lessons. And yeah, it's very much, it makes you action the course, which I'm sure everyone's done the same, where they've gone, oh yeah, all this great information, and then you go off and you forget and you don't put it into your lessons, or it's really hard to suddenly put all these different things into lessons. So yeah, it's very much actions it, and it's over the course of a year as well. So I think there's 7 or 8 training days, and that's been quite good because it's always there, it's always sort of in your mind and progressing over the last year. So yeah, I've really enjoyed that course as well.
Awesome. All right, so last couple of questions. I think this has become my favorite question at the minute, but what is the ultimate driving song? I'm making a Spotify playlist for the Instructor podcast so we can have it on in between listening to the podcast, obviously. What song are you going to put onto that list?
So I have to put this song on because I used it on my the day of my standards check. So Mr. Brightside by the Killers. So on the way to picking up my pupil, even after I'd shouted at myself about it's just a driving lesson, I had calmed myself a little bit. I felt like I'd got myself back into I'm okay, but I could feel tense. And I know from stuff that I've read before that actually something that stress creates the hormones in your body that create tension, and sometimes you just got to get it out of your system to be able to move past it. So Mr. Brightside went on full blast, and I was singing away in the car, and I'm sure people were looking at me at the traffic lights like I'm an absolute nutter. But if nothing else, it was a few minutes of not thinking about the standards check. And by that time I got to the pupil's house, and so it was able to then switch into driving instructor mode. So yeah, that one definitely has to be from her.
I think we'll make Mr. Brightside the official standards check theme music.
Interestingly, I've done this with pupils in the past where we have a driving test song, and they pick a song that they love, and on the way to the test center, we just play that song on, and that's where I kind of got the idea. And yeah, it's like their sort of kind of celebration song or whatever. So we play it on the way to the test, and then when they pass, we play it on the way out as well. So it's like a little theme song to their test.
Right. Do you want to take a moment to tell people where they can find you and anything you've got to offer?
So cowleyschoolofmotoring.com. And yeah, you can find obviously driving lessons and stuff mainly on there, but I also have on there my instructor training stuff, and within there as well, actually, I have written about each one of the competencies and how I sort of see each competency. So there's a whole load of information about each competency on there. My YouTube page as well, Cowley School of Motoring. Those videos you were talking about are both on YouTube now as well. So they're worth having a look at. And TikTok, which is Cowley School of Motoring as well. So yeah, I'm trying to do more TikToks.
Awesome. We can find those links in the show notes. But yeah, big thank you for joining us today, Phil. Really, really interesting chat, and I appreciate you actually getting in touch to say you were doing it and you'd like to come on and share the results. I'd have been interested to know if you'd have shared them if something had gone drastically wrong and done a similar podcast.
I think I might have ghosted you. Yeah.
But no, thank you for joining us, Steve. It's been an awesome chat, and I'm sure people will get benefit from it. So big thank you to Phil Cowley there, and I hope you found that as interesting as I did. Personally, I don't know if I'm actually going to wind up requesting that standard check, although I'll probably get called in before I request one anyway, but I don't know if I've quite got Phil's confidence there, but I think it's a great thing that he's done, and I'm really pleased he's chosen to share his experience with us. I'd also advise you go and take a look at his video. There is a link in the show notes. You can find it on Facebook and on YouTube. And he breaks down massively about the standards check itself. Sort of spends about 15 minutes talking about the actual standards check. And that's a nice compliment to this episode, I think. So definitely go and check that out. But I want to take a minute just to tell you about the Instructor Podcast Premium. We are getting more and more people signed up to it, which is awesome. And I'm just going to tell you about a few of the benefits. So first of all, you get a host of discounts. You get discounts at places like Client-Centered Learning, the ADI and PDI Doctor, San Harper's Mindfulness courses, Robin Bates' Coach of the Geeks Turbo, Accountability Group, and even the diary app Go Roadie. You get a nice discount over there as well. There's probably going to be some more coming at some point too. But to me, that's not the reason to join. The reason to join, biggest reason, is all the extra content you get. So there's videos and audio files galore over there. Currently over 60 premium exclusive shows that you can go and listen to help you build up your coaching skills, to help you build up your skills as a driving instructor, to look at your business skills, all this kind of stuff, and even take requests. So if there's something you need help with, you can get in touch, and I'm more than happy to do special shows on that could involve you, or it could involve a guest, or it could just be me sharing my experience. I'm really aiming to make this a place to go where people can just pick and choose from this massive selection of content, because it increases every month. There may be currently over 60 pieces of content in there, but by the end of the year, there's going to be close to 100 exclusive pieces of content, and these shows are everything between 10 minutes and over an hour long. So yeah, the feedback I get from my guys is that they're some really good stuff. And the other thing we do over there is we get quarterly Zoom sessions. So on those Zoom sessions, I just jump on board and you guys can fire any questions at me, and I'm happy to answer. They could be questions about standards checks. There could be questions about the podcast. It could be questions about what my favorite TV program is. They're probably going to become a little bit more regular than they are now, but as it is now, they're every quarter. And what I've aimed to do is I've aimed to make something that I wish I had when I first come into the industry. Just this wealth of content, of selection, of choice, and all these amazing people that you can then go and dive into a bit more. Oh, San Harper sounds fun. I'm going to go check out her in more detail. So yeah, I'd love it if you came along. Sign up for a month. It only costs you 10 quid. I suppose 12 if you include VAT. But sign up for a month, check it out. If you like it, great, you can stay. If you don't, you're welcome to disappear. And if you don't like it after a week or so, I'll happily refund you your money back. But if you do have any questions, you're more than welcome to get in touch. But for now, I'm going to love you and leave you. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I hope you're enjoying season 4 so far. Feedback is always welcome, and have an awesome day.
The Instructor Podcast with Terry Cook, talking with leaders, innovators, experts and game changers about what drives them.